Thanks for joining me, and thank you for allowing me to contribute to you. This is going to be a relatively long one that should be watched all the way through. So if you pop it in the middle, well, you won't be hearing this if you pop it in the middle, but it would definitely benefit you to watch it all the way through, regardless of whether or not um, anxiety or overwhelm is your particular challenge that you're looking to resolve for yourself. So let's just talk about a couple of things. First of all, this is really grounded in the presupposition that we're not responding to reality, we're responding to our internal representations of reality. That is, unless something's happening right now, we're responding to our internal representations of it. Whether that's, whether you want to think about that as a memory or whether you're thinking about somebody. And I'll give you a few examples for this that you can experiment with in your own mind while we're doing this. And also that you are making maps all the time: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. This is why when you smell that fragrance from years ago, it brings back a whole host of memories, right? It's kind of an anchor to that previous experience. But we have internal experiences going on all the time, and our mind has coded these things. So and our unconscious mind is managing so much. So when people are in overwhelm, and I'll just deal with overwhelm first, and over my experience with, you know, I've been in this business full time now since 2004, over 500 clients through one-on-one programs over 6 months. And for a few of them, because they're usually high performing clients, or they're stretching themselves or actually expanding their capacities, they're experiencing overwhelm. So I'm going to give you a few case studies and talk about how I resolve that, and you'll be able to do that for yourself as well. You'll be able to have access to that kind of thing in your own mind, or with your own mind, I should say. It's important to remember that two things. First, communication skills are physical skills, but that's also sometimes how you communicate, or navigating your own interiors is a physical skill. I consider it a physical skill, a physical capacity. So all the relevant principles would bear out. It takes practice. It might seem awkward at first. It might take you a while to get familiar with it. But you can do any of the things I talk about today to give yourself instant relief from either overwhelm, which we'll handle first, or anxiety, which we'll handle second. So first, back to that principle that we're not responding to reality, we're responding to our unconscious representations of reality, or our internal representations of reality. To experiment with this and give you a real example for yourself, a real experience for yourself, I'd like you to imagine somebody's face who you're very fond of. And just imagine where that face is around you. Notice the distance as you imagine them, almost like a hologram, but where would they be around you as you think of them? And once you have a lock on their face, you can see them. Maybe they could be anywhere around your space. But once you imagine them, I'd like you to then take that face and move it way far away, and just notice what happens somatically in your body when you do that. When you move their face, and of course they're not in the room with you. I don't think. Maybe they are. But you're responding to that internal representation. It's producing a somatic experience for you. It's producing sensations, depending on where it is. So we go ahead and move it back where it belongs. Now let's talk about overwhelm. And then I'm going to give you three examples of real situations with clients, and just bring into their awareness how they're representing things when they're in overwhelm. And here's how I do that. Client says, I'm in overwhelm. And I'm going to give you three examples, but usually they say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I say, oh, well, if you were to imagine like some metaphor, some representation of all the things that you're handling, what would it be? Now, it's always different. The client always answers differently. The one furthest in the past, they were handling a PhD. They were in a PhD program at the near the end where they were going to give their oral dissertation. They were also a doctor, full time medical doctor, who worked, not an intern. He worked on a wing somewhere, and he was also volunteering 2 days out of the week, his days off, at a community clinic for HIV. So handling lots of things. He would come to my office. He'd always be out of breath. And he said he was overwhelmed. And I asked him how he was representing all the things he had to deal with at the time. His metaphor that was presented, like that when I asked the question, was a radar screen. And he felt that all the projects were on a collision course, right? They were like all these threads were airplanes. They were showing their course and they were all going to crash. So we played around a little bit. I said, what happens if you change the color of it? But what ended up solving the feeling of overwhelm for him was we just added a third dimension. So they had altitude. So instead of it being a two-dimensional radar screen, and he felt instant relief in his body, and then he could be more resourceful and get more things done. Because the thing about the feeling of overwhelm is usually just cluttered thoughts about it, right? So we literally gave him a third dimension to represent all the things he needed to have done, and he felt much better. Breathing slowed down, sank into his chair, and then he could more easily go about planning and doing the things that he needed to do without the experience of overwhelm around it, which often just gets in the way, right? Um, and there wasn't anything he could stop doing or was willing to stop doing, so we really needed to change his internal experience of those things. All right, second example, this client was they were managing a team of people inside an organization that was a training and development organization. And they were new to the job, and they, had again, they had all these things going on. They were changing their offerings. They were new to managing a team of people. They were rolling out training internally as well. And this person was panicked, overwhelmed. And so I asked them how everything was placed, and for them it was like what came to her mind was a mobile that was rotating around, and it was all packed with all this stuff. She couldn't really see anything. And so I simply asked, well, if you weren't feeling overwhelmed, like, what would it look like? And for her, we ended up constructing, and it was also really close to her face. So for her, we ended up constructing this wall in her mind where she could place. So she spent about 10 or 15 minutes physically, but in her mind, physically placing those things up on this wall and dismantling this mobile, which was creating this overwhelm because it was right in her face. The third example was very recent. A client again says, I'm incredibly overwhelmed. I said, well, how is it that you're representing, as a metaphor in your mind, if you ask that part of you that's creating the overwhelm, how it's representing everything. And for them, it was this ball of black noodle-like things, all compressed, but it was a bunch of noodles. So, and it was in a circle, not a sphere. So first we just expanded the size, but kept the noodles the same size so that there was more space in between it. And we kept playing around with it. The noodles automatically changed colors on their own to, like, one was blue, one was, like a pinkish color, one was yellow, and they ended up being wavy but straightened out, not tangled up. And then ended up being about 4 feet apart, or 4 feet wide, the circle, and a little bit further away from her than it was. And she said, I can't believe that I'm experiencing such a somatic shift from this. Just as simple, it took us about 10 or 15 minutes to adjust those things in her mind. It's important to note, and I've said it twice already, but I'm going to say it again. We're not responding to reality. Like, we're not responding to the things, but the thing that's producing the overwhelm isn't just this internal unconscious experience of how it's organized in our minds. And so that gives instant relief for overwhelm. Now, some people might ask a few questions about this, and maybe even more so around the anxiety. Is this some sort of bypass? What I'll say is it isn't, and here's why. Here's the evidence for that. First of all, it's just understanding the unconscious structures of your mind, being able to navigate them with incredible precision and mastery. That's all it is. It's not denying that you're not feeling that. It's not shifting and ignoring. It's actually changing the way it's represented unconsciously, symbolically in your mind, that's out of your awareness, that's producing this emotion. The second thing, though, is in my experience, if something else needs to be done, you won't be able to move it. As an example from my own life, after my divorce, I just kept thinking about my ex-wife, and it was just on my mind, and her face was right here, and I kept trying to move her face so that I would, I tried to use some of these principles. My unconscious mind was having none of it. It kept snapping her back into place because I still had things I needed to learn. There were still benefits I needed to experience from the grief I was in. So there's sort of this built-in, I'll call it a built-in, safety system, but built-in ecology. There will be a part of you that will object. If it's done right, there will be a part of you that will object to, you know, bypassing or pretending it's not there. You don't get to do that with this. What you do get to do is, if it's appropriate, if it's ecological for your whole system, you'll be able to move some of these things around to produce instant relief for yourself with overwhelm. So I do want to address the question of bypass, because a lot of people mistake it for bypass when really it's just being able to. It's like the difference between it's like the matrix. How well can you navigate the matrix, and the matrix in your own mind? And really, that's what it's about. Some people are more skilled at that than others. Some people are Neo. Some people are not. Some people are still plugged in and think it's impossible, right? So that's overwhelm. By the way, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to. I'm happy to take any questions. I can see them here in the dashboard. So, any questions, comments, observations, reactions, things you notice, things you have concerns about, things you're skeptical of, any of that. Okay, let's move into anxiety. First, I'll say there is a danger with removing anxiety from somebody's nervous system, because most people use it for motivation. So if you remove anxiety as an element, you're going to need to develop other ways to motivate yourself. And I prefer to be motivated towards vision. And there is a sweet spot between having things feel so compressed, you feel anxious, and having things feel so spaced out that you don't have any motivation. There's a midpoint there. But on anxiety, there's a few principles I'll talk about. First, the structure of anxiety is one of two things. It's either imagining a future event with a negative outcome. The classic thing is public speaking or something, or just imagining it's not going well. But just like we talked about with the symbology of overwhelm, that seems to be it's different for everybody. Yet the universal principle is there, that there'll be some icky thing that we have to adjust, and then that creates the relief. But with anxiety, usually there's just a movie looping in your head outside of your awareness. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's combined with overwhelm or is similar to overwhelm, in that the number of things you need to do, that you need to get done in a certain period of time. But also, we all have an unconscious organization of time. Our unconscious mind, past, present, and future, and for about half the population. And you'll see people say, well, I got to put that behind me, or they'll gesture towards the future, or maybe it's a left to right orientation for them. It's about half the population's in time, meaning the presence in their body. The future is generally in front of them, the past is generally behind them. For another half the population, it's generally a left to right orientation, but the key is that the present is not in their body, it's just outside of their body. And sometimes there's combinations of those, but the key distinction is in time is present in your body, through time is present outside of your body. But for anxiety, I've noticed that people's future timelines are compressed, meaning, let's say if I imagine, or you imagine it for yourself right now, like, where is next week around you? If you just close your eyes, sink into your chair, and think about where next week is around you, and plot that point in space, and then a year in the future, and then 10 years, right? And then back to the body, back to the present, or yesterday, where is that, or last week, wherever that is for you, or 10 years ago. And these will be in your mind points in time. And we can, by the way, usually what I just rushed you through takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes with a client to really elicit their timeline initially. But in my experience working with all those clients, if they're feeling anxiety, their future timeline will be compressed. So in other words, instead of a year being say 10 feet away from them, it'll be like 10 inches away from them. And so their unconscious organization of time is tightly compressed. So if we simply spread it out a bit, put more space in between it, it will give them some relief from anxiety. Or have them actually zoom up in their mind above their timeline and give them more perspective on their timeline, so they have a larger section of it that they can see when they're imagining it. And both of those things can give you instant relief from anxiety. We can also go back and just pull it out of your nervous system, but that takes a much longer. It's not something I can do here, but I'll be demonstrating it sometime next couple of weeks on a webinar with a client, or a volunteer, not a client, but a volunteer. And so that gives you that sort of instant relief. But again, you want to play with the distance. You just want to notice where you feel like, doesn't matter if I get up today, or your timeline spaced out, or when you compress it, when you start to feel anxiety somatically in your body. So you begin to play with those internal structures for yourself. Again, is this bypass? No, it's not, in that it's navigating your internal structures with great artistry and skill. And it is a physical skill, and you've seen me, or if you've been paying attention to me at all for a while, I've said and written many times that in navigating your interiors is a physical skill, just like communication skills are a physical skill. And it's important to become practiced at it, but also to give yourself grace around it. Sometimes part of the practice is just noticing, going, oh, that's right, I can make this adjustment. It takes me a certain period of time before I realize I can make this shift. None of the things go away. It doesn't solve, it just changes your experience around reality. It doesn't alter facts. It just gives you more ease and more relief in your body, so that you can actually go into action to take care of the things you need to take care of. But I want to circle back. If you remove anxiety, then you're going to have to make sure that you have some sort of motivation strategy in place to make sure that you get the things done that you get done. And that's different for everybody. When I support a client, just like with accountability, when I'm supporting clients, I don't have a certain way I hold people. I ask them, how would you like to be held accountable? What do you need to be held accountable to? And help them. And also, by the way, if I let them create the accountability structure, then they're only pushing back against themselves. It's one of the ways in which I've avoided tension with clients, over the last 16 years, is I have them design the structure and then I just put it in place. So the only thing they would be resisting would be their own outcomes, their own desires. And it's a nice sidestep. So those are both very quick, easy ways that you can, and some of that may seem foreign to you. Some of it may seem like something else to you, or that may be familiar to you. That's fine, but just begin to notice that you can navigate your own interiors with great artistry, great precision, and become a master of your own experience. And then get the things done, or at least think clearly. It was a lot faster than I expected it to be. You, of course, can always reach me at evolutionarycompanies.com. And I'm about halfway through the NLP course right now, the NLP certification training that I've been offering. It's the last time I'm offering it, so this isn't a pitch for that. But I'll be doing a weekend workshop for some tools for coaches that you'll see soon. Anyway, thank you again for allowing me to contribute to you, and thanks for joining me here. Enjoy the rest of your day.